BLOCKTV. It's time now for Links in the Chain. Now, when it comes to bringing forward good crypto legislation for regulators to work with, it is undoubtedly an uphill battle. Fortunately, there are those out there willing and able to fight the good fight, and I speak now with a Bitcoin OG going back to 2012 and someone who has served tirelessly to bring her Wall Street knowledge to the crypto sphere. I'm joined, of course, by Caitlin Long, co-founder of the Wyoming Blockchain Task Force, the, what I must say now, defunct Wyoming Blockchain Task Force, although not necessarily in a particularly bad way. Let's say there's a positive spin on all that, but we'll get to that in a moment. Before we do, firstly, Caitlin, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, Asher, it's great to be back with BLOCKTV. Thank you.
All right, our absolute pleasure having you on. And so let's break this down for our viewers to understand. Of the Wyoming Blockchain Task Force, a pioneer in helping to develop some key legislation there in the state of Wyoming and throughout the United States, but now defunct. Why is that the case?
Well, the task force is growing up into something bigger and better, into a legislative committee that can originate its own legislation. So it's actually moving into a more powerful realm. For somebody like me who's a private citizen and not an elected official, I can't officially participate on a legislative committee, of course. So I'm moving on. In fact, the task force completed its work in September, and we've reported out 8 bills that have now been sponsored by legislative committees for the 2020 legislative session. And that, in plain English, means that they're likely to become law. I'm still on the ground here in Wyoming, and I will still be working with legislators as a private citizen to help get those laws enacted.
Yeah, it's fantastic work that has been achieved so far. One recent law directive that was put forward by that task force that sort of rose some prominence and caught some attention was that special purpose depository institutions legislation that came out. Can you detail a little bit about that for us, Caitlin, and help people to understand what power and influence that might have in getting further enactions of crypto legislation?
Yeah, the special purpose depository institutions are nicknamed speedy banks. They're anything but speedy, so it's an ironic name, but they are actually banks that will help the industry to obtain and maintain reliable on and off ramps into and out of the fiat system. They will not be able to accept crypto deposits, but they will be able to provide trust services for their clients. So the difference there is that the only thing that's on the bank's balance sheet is going to be dollars and other foreign exchange, traditional fiat currencies. But just like any trust company can hold any type of asset on behalf of a customer, these speedy banks will have trust powers to be able to hold crypto. So I think the impact of this is going to be pretty meaningful, because you will see, I believe, crypto exchanges coming into Wyoming, crypto custodians coming into Wyoming, and crypto lending companies coming into Wyoming. And here's a really important takeaway. Because Wyoming has very strict laws with respect to privacy rights, which we think is a very big positive, you're not going to see the sort of 3-card Monte games that are being played by so much of the traditional financial industry within Wyoming. And so the companies that actually come into Wyoming and voluntarily comply with the requirements of the Speedy Bank are going to therefore be, I think, viewed as a head and shoulders above the companies that domicile in places that allow those 3-card Monte games like New York or California, et cetera.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, as well as establishing these institutions, you guys have also, there in Wyoming, helped to establish direct property rights for digital asset holders, establish a fintech sandbox, a whole slew of different achievements that can be attributed to the task force. Overall, looking at where you stand now, as you say, the task force has morphed into its next form, into its next governmental form. But from where you stand as the founder of the original task force and one of the founders there, do you see that it was a success? And what's your sort of mid to long-term view on crypto regulation, crypto and blockchain regulation rather, in Wyoming and in the wider United States?
Well, sure, it was a success both for the industry and for the state of Wyoming. We don't know how many businesses are here because one of the nice things about Wyoming is that there is no government database that collects information on how many companies have moved here. There is one registry where you can keyword search the name of the company, but of course, most companies in this industry don't necessarily have the word Bitcoin or blockchain or crypto in their company name. We've got to be well over 1,000 of those that do, but I would say thousands more who don't have those sort of keywords in their name. And I know they're here, but I think it's great that we don't collect the data, so we don't really know how many are here. And then the speedy banks, that's a big deal. I know of 7 that are in the pipeline. They won't be open until mid to late 2020. And you know, maybe not all of them will get their license. They will actually have to go through a process with the Federal Reserve. So this is going to be interesting. It's a new type of financial institution. We see a pipeline of about $20 billion of assets that could come into Wyoming by the end of 2020. So all of that is a success. And we also see other states in the United States wanting to copy us. And now other regions outside of the United States looking to connect in to try to build a global, seamless regulatory structure. That's hard to do. It's hard enough to do it inside the United States, much less outside. But we're working on it, and we are definitely here in Wyoming viewed as one of the more thoughtful places. And I must say, I'm just the face of this. There are so many people who've made it happen, and most especially the developers and industry people who gave of their time to make sure that we got it right. This wasn't a group of lawyers who don't own cryptocurrencies who were developing these requirements. This was some of those folks as well, but a lot of us of hodlers who really care about getting this right and wanting to create an industry-friendly legal regime that plugs into the traditional financial industry in a way that they can accept.
Right, and it does seem that Wyoming has laid itself out as a state of best practice for those trying to establish some sort of crypto legislation or blockchain-based legislation throughout the United States. That being said, many states take different approaches. Now you've sort of wrapped up for now in Wyoming. Do you think you're going to take the fight to the wider space, either to other states or to the federal level?
Well, the funny thing is we really haven't wrapped up. All we did is wrap up the task force, but it's morphing into something bigger and better. So Wyoming's not done. I don't want your listeners to take away the sense that Wyoming's done, because once we attract an industry like this in, its needs are going to change. And I was looking at South Dakota, which built the trust industry originally, and they enact an average of 2 new laws a year to update their trust laws. So I think you can expect that out of Wyoming. We've made a commitment to this industry. The industry's coming. There are more announcements coming that I know are in the pipeline. And so once the companies get here, they'll want to keep the laws as friendly as possible to to what they're trying to do within especially with the speedy banks. They've got to fit within the Federal Reserve System, right? So that's not an easy balance to create, but we're going to have to update continuously those rules and regulations in order to keep them current. So Wyoming's not done. But to your broader question, sure, I'm helping where I can. The way I like to think about what Wyoming did is we created an open source operating system that's available to anybody to come in and use it to build applications, i.e. businesses, on top of it.
All right, so Caitlin, I wanted to ask then as well about your personal plans beyond Wyoming and how you intend to expand your future out into the crypto space, going into other states and around the country.
Well, I moved to Wyoming. I'm committed to Wyoming. I grew up here and lived away for 29 years and came back in the summertime. So I'm not going anywhere physically. We created an open source operating system that anybody, to use software analogy, can use to build applications, equivalent to the businesses. that are being built. By analogy, those are just applications that are available on the operating system, and the operating system is open source, and to use the analogy, it's MIT licensed. So as long as you're willing to comply with the requirements, you can use it. And that's available for other states to copy as well. You have fast followers that are looking to copy what we're doing. And I think that's great. I want Wyoming to have the lead, obviously, because we really stuck our necks out. And I think we will. I think at most, or at minimum, we'll have an 18-month to 2-year lead, even on other U.S. states that want to be a fast follower. But I'm going back to work in the private sector. I've taken the last almost 2 years off to work as a volunteer, and it's time for me to go back and become gainfully employed again, most likely in the blockchain industry. But at this point, I don't know for sure what I'll be doing next. I'm going to take a break. But since you and I committed to do this, I took a break from my digital detox to come back on and do your show today.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I appreciate you coming on for that, Caitlin. And lastly, just before we conclude, I wanted to ask you as well, we've seen a little bit of a downturn in crypto markets, obviously, in the last several months. We've had a bit of a pullback and a bit of hesitation in the industry as a whole. I'm not asking you about price here, but are you concerned at all about stagnation in terms of innovation in this industry across the whole blockchain world as a whole? Or do you see nothing but growth on the horizon looking forward into next year and beyond?
Yeah, I don't pay that much attention to the day-to-day price because ultimately, I think that in bull markets, it's a distraction for the most important people in this industry, which is the developers. Developers are, without them, we wouldn't be where we are. And I loved what happened during crypto winter, to be honest, because the developers got back to work and look at all the breakthroughs that we've had on all of the various protocols, including upgrades to the original ones like Bitcoin. And look what's happening in Ethereum. I think all of this is great. And frankly, the price is what the price is. Especially with Bitcoin, I'm not worried about it because the supply is finite and it is what it is. And as more and more people come in and as more and more transactions happen in Bitcoin every day, that's generally going to keep the price going up and to the right. And I look at the hash rate, and as the hash rate keeps going up, which generally speaking it does, as long as we're in a bull market for hash rate in Bitcoin, we'll be in a bull market for the Bitcoin price. And we've never really left the bull market. Actually, most technicians will say that Bitcoin actually never really had a bear market. It was just a correction within a broader bull market. I think that's likely to continue, but I'm not giving any price predictions because I don't pay that much attention to it myself.
All right, absolutely fair enough. Caitlin, I want to thank you so much for joining us here today. I love your passion, I love your enthusiasm, and I love what you did there in Wyoming. I look forward to seeing it spread across the United States into the future. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us here at BLOCKTV, and for those at home, stay with us at blocktv.com for all the latest in news and information. I'm Asher Westrop Evans. Thanks for watching.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.